It was really hard to narrow down our fight of the night selections for this weekend. In your main event, you have a wild fight coming up between Corey Sandhagen and the man himself, TJ Dillashaw. And it goes on from there. This fight is no different. We have Julio Arce taking on Mr. Highlight Andre Ewell. And for Andre Ewell fans, stay tuned for more with Fight Night picks. If you're not already subscribed, do so. It's easy. It's free. I won't charge you. You toss us a like. I'll pat myself on the back and Matt. And listen, maybe an angel gets his wings. But in this fight, this is Julio Arce's first fight since 2016 at bantamweight. His last time out was a second consecutive loss against Brian Kelleher. He ended up losing that fight by submission. But since then, well, he's only lost two fights. Two of his last three. Hakeem Dawodu by split decision. That was back in 2019, the last time we saw him. He had a fight booked earlier this year against Timur Valiev that he was forced to withdraw from. He had a win over Julian Erosa before that. A loss against PFL's Shimon Moraes by split decision as well. But in the UFC, a win over Dan Ige and also win over Daniel Tamor. Is he your favorite, Tamor?
Probably, I'd have to say.
Your favorite over David. But I was in the building for his win over Dan Ige, and that cemented my love for Julio Arce, my respect for Julio Arce. This is a former Ring of Combat featherweight champ. He had an absolute great run before he came into the UFC, and he's one of the lone fighters that you see in the UFC training out of Tiger Schulman's. Mike Trezano, another one. Shane Burgos, another guy as well. Two great guys to train with for a fight like this against Andre Ewell, who has some of the lankiest, longest strikes that you're going to find in this division.
Andre Ewell's a guy who we've been talking about his boxing for what feels like years now, and it almost felt like the UFC was starting to come around on the Andre Ewell hype train. They were like, hey, you want to fight Marlon Vera? And I know, I was really excited for that fight. Chito Vera, he's super exciting, never gets into a boring fight. At that time, Andre Ewell had just come off the Anderson Dos Santos win, and he looked great in that fight. And that was kind of where we saw the limitation of Andre Ewell's skill set, because he did look good in the early goings of that fight. But you can tell that every minute that passed, Marlon Vera was able to get closer to him, and closer to him, and closer to him. And the thing about Andre Ewell is that the negative space in between him and his opponent is almost like an offensive weapon for him. The longer range that he can keep from his opponent means that he can snipe them on the way in from longer away. He is kind of similar. People aren't going to like this comp, but he is similar to Conor McGregor, to where he has that wide stance. A lot of people talking about his boxing. He's not really a traditional boxer. Same thing with McGregor. Like, McGregor fought Mayweather, and a lot of people say, oh, he's a boxer, oh, he's a boxer, he's a boxer. He's not. He's a counter-striker, and an MMA counter-striker at that. He's very good when his opponent is smaller, and when they have to rush in at him, because he's a very intelligent striker, and he can see where the openings of his opponent are. And honestly, Andre Ewell has a very rudimentary form of that game, but there are some similarities there. The weird thing about Andre Ewell is that up until his last fight against Chris Gutierrez, at least he was winning most of the striking exchanges in all of his fights. Like, even in the Marlon Vera fight, when they're at long range, he's beating Marlon Vera up, and he's beating him to the punch. But once they get into clinch and on the ground, Marlon Vera just beats the brakes off him, and that really is the problem with Andre Ewell. When you do find a way to get on the inside of his range, he really does struggle. And he's not a guy like Brian Ortega, who figured out, okay, I'm tall and I'm good at boxing. Well, when guys get close to me, oh, I should probably learn elbows and spinning elbows, because now I'm going to make them pay for it. Andre Ewell's never really found that close range weapon, and I really do feel like he's a fighter who, if he could just figure out like a basic tie clinch and throw some knees up the middle, I really do feel like he could win some of those close fights that he has lost. But the last loss to Chris Gutierrez really did hurt the stock of Andre Ewell in my mind's eye, because he not only got beat up with the leg kicks, he got beat up with the body kicks, and he even started to lose some of the boxing exchanges with Gutierrez through the end of the fight. That's the thing with Ewell. He has that great style, he's a great counter striker, but every minute that ticks off the clock, his opponent gets a little bit more into the fight and a little bit more into the fight. And this is going to be interesting in this fight, and I actually want to get your opinion on this, because Julio Arce, I feel like, is a very good fighter, but the one thing that he does lack is a very, very high output, and I do feel like in this fight, he could almost get caught into that single strike for single strike with a guy like Andre Ewell.
Both guys actually, through their UFC runs, are above and away the UFC average in terms of output. Now, it does go slightly in the favor of Andre Ewell. It's 4.25 for Arce to 4.42 significant strikes landed per minute, but that's the thing. The strike percentage is better for Ewell. There's going to be a lot of hitting air. You see that with some Tiger Schulman guys. Jimmy Rivera's a guy like that. He has to kind of break distance by throwing strikes and then collapse on his guys. which you would think Arce is actually going to have to do in this fight against Ewell, another good guy to train with. However, having said all that, the striking differential is much better for Arce. 2.87 strikes absorbed per minute to 4.25 absorbed for Ewell, who has a slight positive compared to a major positive for Arce. In terms of the grappling, a little negligible. I mean, listen, you're not going to see Ewell shoot for takedowns, although over on his Instagram, he has been training his wrestling at the Silverback Wrestling Academy with Pedro Tavares and Ian Butler. So maybe you do like to see that. I think that's a good picture to see from the last couple of weeks. But for Julio Arce, if he's going to do anything, it's hard to take him down. We've seen that so far in his run, even on the regional scene as well. So when I look at this fight, the odds, maybe not a surprise to me. They might be a surprise because he hasn't been all that active. Again, this is his first fight since November of 2019, losing by split decision to Hakeem Dawodu, the premier Muay Thai striker, if there ever was one. I look at this line, Arce open to minus 180, he's a minus 197 right now. For Ewell, open to plus 155. He's a plus 162. If we have a look at Tapology, the fan votes are as surprised as they are to you. Matt, 617 total votes, 72% Arce, 85% of the fans have him to win by decision. For the 28% that have Ewell, 80% by decision. This is the third fight in a row where the fans are predicting this fight ends in a decision. What are you saying here?
This is a weird fight, honestly, because I can see a world where Andre Ewell is able to keep that distance. He is able to just crack left straight, and just keep on landing on Julio Arce, because I do feel like the speed advantage does lie with Andre Ewell. The issue is that he doesn't have that plan B backup. He doesn't have a great takedown he can go to if he does get hurt on the feet. He doesn't check leg kicks, which is another really big issue, and we saw that hole get completely exposed in his last fight. And that's really my problem with Andre Ewell. I love the plan A, but the problem is, where is the plan B? We've never really seen him be able to go to a really solid backup plan in any of these fights. And this thing about Julio Arce, he can be a little bit of a slow starter, and that could give Andre Ewell a chance to crack him early on in the fight. But other than that one early opportunity from Ewell to crack him when he's cold, I actually do like Arce by decision in this one.
For Arce, I think it's going to be one of those rolling tide type of fights, and that's why I like Arce in this one as well. Again, I think a guy that took that time off. It's unfortunate that we didn't get to see the fight against Valiev, and you might kind of snicker at that one because of how good Valiev is and how good of a fight he had against Raoni Barcelos.
It would have been a tough fight for Arce.
Would have been a tough fight, but he's been planning the move down to bantamweight. It's not like this was a snap judgment like, well, Sijara, Eubanks, and Elise Reed meeting in the middle at 125. So for those reasons, I like Julio Arce. If you really do feel strongly about Andre Ewell, you let us know down below in the comments section, and you're not going to want to miss our own JHK's interview with Mr. Highlight. So check that out on the channel. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it.